All right. How's everybody doing? We are super close to the end here, coming up on that AP exam in just a few days. We are looking now at one of our new regional reviews, which is the Middle East. That's what we're going to be taking a look at today. Got three amazing students here who are ready to make fives on their AP exam. So that is why they are here. And they are going to be rocking and rolling. Oh, well, we got one more. Hello, Terrence. What we are going to be doing here is taking a look at the Middle East, which is kind of a weird place for us in AP World History, and I'll tell you a little bit why, a little bit about why in just a second. So let's go ahead and share this tab. All right. Let's crack it open for a slideshow here. We're looking at Middle East review for World History AP. Again, technically this is World History AP modern, but that's fine. But we're taking a look at Middle East. Why is this kind of weird? Well, a couple of reasons. One is that it's not really a thing exactly. Like I kind of mentioned this, I think, in some other things too. But like I can talk about like Africa, right? And we can talk about it as a continent. It's a big place there. We could talk about South America or even like Europe, which is again kind of a perceptual region, but at the same time, there are some rules to it. Like there's an ocean and a couple of mountain ranges and stuff like that. The Middle East, though, is very much what we call in AP Human Geography a perceptual region or a vernacular region, meaning that there is not a clear definition. Like I'm going to show you, this is one map here. I'm going to show you another map in a second, which has other countries on it, right? So it's a little bit confusing. This is kind of our core of the Middle East here, right? A couple of things that you will generally mark this area for. It is generally fairly deserty, right? So we've got Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and all that kind of stuff. It is predominantly Islamic, though there are exceptions, of course, like Israel. And then there are some divisions there as well, like Iran being Shia versus the others being Sunni Muslim. So there are some things like that. But again, it's mostly going to be a place that is Islamic. It is going to be a place that the physically or like environmentally tends to be fairly dry. In the modern day especially, we have a lot of like kind of dictatorship kind of governments and stuff in this region. So those are all kind of like things we can look at there. But again, it's in that little middle region there. You'll notice Egypt, for example, is actually on Africa, whereas the other sections are not. It seems unlikely. I don't know that I've ever seen a question where they use the term Middle East on the test properly. Like, I don't think they're like in the Middle East, blah, 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 right? Like, typically speaking, they're going to call like Afro-Eurasia or something, or they'll say like the Islamic areas of Afro-Eurasia or something like that. That's what you're typically going to see. But I feel like this is a good region because, I mean, I don't really want to do like a general Asian region because that's just going to be so enormous. So we do East Asian, South Asian, etc. And I want to make sure we cover this region. So that's one of the reasons I'm doing it there. But take a look. Here's another example of what could be the Middle East. So you can see that we still have that core region there, Turkey, Syria. Oh, excuse me, Saudi Arabia. Egypt, etc. But you'll notice a couple of other countries added in as well. So you'll see Afghanistan, for example, over on the right or to the east. But then you'll also see northern Sudan as well as Libya added in part of Africa. I've seen it also go to like Tunisia or Algeria. Like if we're talking about a place that is predominantly Muslim, that could qualify as that as well. So just don't get it twisted. Don't get weird about it. Like most of the places on the outskirts, like Sudan or Libya, are really not places that have a lot of like stuff we've talked about. So again, kind of focusing on that core region there is really what we're talking about. We're talking about the Turkeys and the Saudi Arabias, etc. We do have a couple of very specific empires that are going to be powerful here. So let's chat about those. All right, let's go into time period 1200 to 1450. Cool. 1200, 1450. Anytime, again, you want to talk or have a question, please feel free to drop it in the chat. I may not see it. I'm looking at a slightly different space here. It just makes it easier for me. But I will check on it every once in a while just to make sure that it's not there or that you don't have any questions. So we're starting off time period 1200 to 1450. We are going to have like at the very beginning of this time period, we are going to have like kind of a transitional time in the Islamic world. So if we go back before 1200, little historical context, right? We have in about the 600s, 700s, we have the beginnings and the foundations of the Islamic Empire with Muhammad, having his revelations and so forth. And so that's the early phase to it. They will initially expand. Then they will have the Umayyads. This family will take over. They'll expand even bigger. But the problem for the Umayyads, though, is that they don't really want to treat everybody the same. Like they don't want the converts to have the same rights as the Arab Muslims. So it becomes a big issue and they get overthrown. And so the next group then is going to be this group called the Abbasid. And so in the early phases of the Abbasid, we are going to see it as a time of innovation. This is kind of our golden age of Islam. So the people who are in control of this dynasty are called the caliphs or caliphs. These are the kind of successors to Muhammad who are supposed to be in charge. The problem, though, is that by 1200, the beginning of our time period here, that central rule is really fading. Like the size of the empire is enormous. So like they're starting to lose control over the outskirts of it, even within the kind of core area too, different like rulers and people are taking over control and dominating those areas. And so we're also seeing a decreasing interest in the rulers and anything kind of but pleasure is one of the issues that they're facing as well. So just sort of bad government, etc. Much like the Romans, then, we'll see that the Abbasids are going to start inviting in sort of nomadic soldiers. Instead of fighting them, they're going to invite them in and let them sort of like fight instead. So they're going to invite in this group. Initially, they invited in a group called the Buyids, but they kind of go away pretty quickly. So we're going to have the Seljuks then, who are the important ones here. The Seljuks will take over this space. However, they are destroyed by the Mongols, as are the Abbasid proper. So once all that happens, then we will have this thing called the Ilkhanate that will be in Iran, like a kind of Persian area. And so Mongols will rule that space under a Mongol leader called Hulagu. I think he is a grandson of Genghis Khan, maybe. But again, this is kind of a convoluted time period, right? Abbasids, and then we have the Seljuks. Then we're going to have the Mongols kind of crush all this stuff together. Well, under the vacuum that is left by the Mongols, then as the sort of Mongols like they crush a whole bunch of people, but then they're sort of pushed back a bit. So into that vacuum of power, then we are going to have the Ottoman Turks will take over. They eventually will conquer the Byzantines. We'll talk more about that in a second, and they're going to expand and become bigger and bigger. Because they control Istanbul, they will be the center for trade on the Silk Road. They also are part of the Indian Ocean Trade Network. Y'all, I am sorry. I don't know why I'm so sleepy today. I even had a cup of coffee before we did this. Apologies, but we'll get through it. All right. Here is a map for you of the Abbasid Caliphate in about the 9th century. So again, even in this time period, 300 years before the Mongols and stuff, you can see they're already starting to kind of fall apart a little bit. So all the way over there to the west, we have Spain under control of the remnant of the Umayyad dynasty, the Umayyad Emirates. We have a couple of other people there, the Idrisids and the Aghlabadids of Tunisia and stuff. They are sort of under the suzerainty of the Abbasids. All the way out into the right, then you'll also see another group there that's fairly powerful as well. But that central green area then is going to be under the direct rule. And you can see their capital at Baghdad, which is kind of a very cosmopolitan location and cosmopolitan place. So that is the kind of largest extent. But as things go on, then like Egypt will kind of go out from under their control. And then parts of Muscat or, Yemen or whatever are going to leave their control. And so they're going to really just be sort of in this core area. And then once the Seljuks come in, then they will still sort of theoretically be in charge, but it's really the Seljuks running everything day to day. All right, couple of other kind of just little things along here. We have this dynasty in Egypt that is called the Mamluks. They will also kind of pull away from the Abbasids as well. So these are slave soldiers that take over control of Egypt. So much like those Janissaries that we have with the Ottomans, this is going to be a slave dynasty that takes over control. They actually will defeat the Mongols at the Battle of Ain Jalut, which is a pretty famous battle that prevents the Mongols from expanding further out of the Middle East. Important cities here in this time period in the Middle East are Cairo and Baghdad. A couple of famous people here that maybe you want to hear about. We got Nasir al-Din-Tusi, who's a famous mathematician, kind of invented trigonometry. We have a famous Sufi poet known as Rumi. And then we have a couple of Ibns here. We got Ibn Battuta, who we talked about when we talked about Africa. He is the traveler. We also have another guy named Ibn Khaldun, who is a famous historian in this period. And then we have the most famous female poet. I would love it if one of y'all put her name on the test, just because I would love to see you misspell it. Her name is Aisha bint Yusuf al-Baunya, I think is how you pronounce that. But she's a very famous Sufi poet, #girlboss, who is writing lots of literature, etc. at the time and becomes pretty famous for it. The House of Wisdom is in Baghdad. This is this gigantic library kind of structure where they're kind of having lots of information. And then lastly, we kind of talked about these on Friday, though we didn't really keep it in the game, but these things are called, I think they're called Khanats. I think it's a K kind of sound for the Q, or cute, yeah, Kanats, I guess. I don't know. But these are water producing constructions. They're kind of like underground aqueducts, which I'll show you in a second. These again would be a good example of some sort of like successful like technology or something that is being created by people in this time period. The picture is kind of cool. These are really neat, like the way that these things work. So what you're seeing here is a mountainside. Okay, so over here on the right, you see irrigated area. This is the place where they're having crops and all that kind of stuff. But the problem is things are pretty dry in this region, right? So what they realize is that there is a water table. This is true wherever you are, but the water table kind of tends to follow the shape of mountains, etc. So what they you see down there at the bottom, the water table. So if you want to get water to the top, you could dig a big well down to the bottom, but that's going to be a lot of effort, right? So instead, what you do is you build this channel, like you literally bore a hole into a mountain, which again, I don't know how they did that. That sounds really difficult, but they bore this hole into the channel. They have these vertical access shafts, which allow for cleaning and keeping them like with oxygen and things like that to help it flowing freely. And then that cannot channel them just pulls water off the water table and allows them to pull it down to that irrigated area. So again, the College Board loves these sort of like chinampas and waru waru and all this kind of stuff. They love talking about irrigations and stuff. So this might be an example of that you could use if it comes up. I hope it doesn't come up, but if it happens to come up, that is a possibility for you. All right. Toss in any questions, guys. Again, these are like real short kind of reviews that we're doing here. So if I'm not kind of covering enough of what you need or you have other questions, please feel free to drop in and ask one. Okay. Next up, take a look at time period 1450 to 1750. This is our time period of, this is that unit 3, which is the empires unit. So we have a lot of these kind of gunpowder empire type things, Ottomans. The Mughals are not technically in the Middle East, but they would also be a part of that. Also the Safavids and others. So the Ottomans then, which we saw in the first group here, they're going to expand really up until about the 1600s. Famously, Suleiman the Magnificent almost takes Vienna. That's in the late 16th century. And so that is the kind of furthest extent of Ottoman expansion, but they're still pretty powerful after that. So it's a pretty slow decline is one of the issues. One of the problems that they have is that the leadership of the religious groups, the ulema, the kind of like Muslim judges, they are very conservative and they don't want to have a lot of change, which will lead to an inability to innovate is one of their biggest issues here. They don't want to innovate. They don't want to bring in new stuff or whatever. They don't want to change. They're going to barely even adopt like, basic gunpowder kind of weapons and stuff. They just want to have everything be the same basically. So that's going to cause some problems for them. One of the big issues for the Ottomans as well is that they were they had a lot of silver at the time. Like they had a lot of silver mines and stuff in Anatolia. And so when this new trade of the Americas starts bringing a ton of silver over with it, it causes a lot of problems. That silver will cause inflation in the empire and hurt the economy. So things start dropping and start going up in price, but the value of the silver is going to be even less. That's the big issue there for them. And so that will cause a lot of issues in the long run for them. Istanbul, though, in this period is still a major trade city. That's the end of the Silk Road. Even if the Silk Road is becoming less important in this period due to Portuguese trade, it's still, fairly important. The Safavids then are going to be in modern day Iran. They'll be founded in 1501 by Ismail. But they're not Shia. They're not Sunni. They are Shia. So again, go back in time with me for a minute, way before time period 1, back in the days of the Prophet Muhammad. When he dies, he doesn't really have a clear heir. And so the two different sides form up, one of which says that they need to be somebody who is in some form or fashion related to the Prophet, and the other group that says that they don't really care. Okay, so they just have to be a good Muslim and standing. So the Sunni are those who believe that they should just be good Muslims and standing. The Shia are those who believe that it needs to have some sort of relationship to the Prophet. And so the only real major areas of Shia are going to be in Iran. And so that is the area that they are going to found their empire in, which means that they consider themselves to be this powerful group of people who are kind of keeping the true quote unquote Islam together. So they're going to have a lot of conflicts with the Ottomans, not only for military or like territorial control, but also for like the power of who's in charge, who is the better Islamic group instead. One of the most famous battles here, Battle of Chaldiran, will lead to the divisions of Sunni and Shia today. Nobody quite wins that battle, but it kind of defines the split between the two of them. These are both gunpowder empires, and Shah Abbas I was the greatest of their leaders, kind of the highest point of it. The Ottomans, again, are going to be around for quite a while. The Safavids will fade and basically collapse after 1700 or so. I don't know why I put another Qanat in there. Why did I do that. Okay, I went backwards. That was the reason why. Sorry. Here you go with your gunpowder empires. You can see the Safavids versus the Ottomans. Again, we're not worried about the Mughal here. That's going to be South Asia. But for the Middle East, then you can see that area there is the Safavids and the Ottomans, the Ottoman capital at Constantinople. But they're going to spread throughout all those different areas. The capital is the Safavids is Esfahan, and they again are going to be sort of this like powerful group of Shia. They are trying to protect themselves and trying to protect the idea of Shia Islam. All right, toss in questions whenever. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here yawning at you all night. All right, time period two, 1450 to 1750 continued. Again, don't forget these slave soldiers within the Ottoman Empire. The Safavid Empire has them as well. They're called Janissaries in the Ottoman Empire. In Ottoman Empire, they're going to use the Devshirme system to choose these folks. Basically, they're going to go to the Balkans where there are Christian boys. They are going to have those boys. They're going to, it sounds like it's kidnapping. It's not really that. I mean, they have to kind of go in and they have to take a certain number of boys. I'm sure these guys didn't want to go necessarily, but it was an opportunity to gain some influence and power for your son. So, like most parents were okay with this in general. It's not like people snuck in the middle of the night and did a what do you call it, Hunger Games thing or something like that. It was more like they would come to town and say, we need a boy from your town to come be essentially like a draft, to come in and be in that system. And so they were able to advance in some ways. The Safavid Empire will have something similar. They're typically called Ghulam, but that term is kind of used for like any sort of these soldiers. So like somebody might call Janissaries Ghulam if they were in a more generic sense. But the Ghulam of the Safavid Empire, again, were also slave soldiers. They would get them from Christians in the Caucasus Mountains instead. So they would also do the same thing. They bring them in, they convert them to Islam, they would train them and so forth. Also within the Safavid Empire, another way that they were able to keep control is the Kizilbash. These are powerful military soldiers in the Safavid Empire. So that was one of the ways they were able to militarily maintain power. Mehmet II was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire that took control of Constantinople. That's going to be in 1453. Also, don't forget on the Omani European rivalry. So this is that weird thing that pops up all the time because for some reason somebody on the college board just decided they really thought it was interesting and wanted to throw it in there. But basically what this is, it's a trade rivalry. This is like literally ripped from a definition off the internet. A trade rivalry between the Muslim traders from Oman and the European Christian traders over the Indian Ocean trade and trade settlements in Oman. So the empire based on small trading outposts rather than control of large territories. And it was usually along important gosh, that's some bad spelling, sea trade routes. All right, so if we take a look at a picture here, so that is modern day Oman, right? It's that little area there on the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, so that's where it gets its name from. And over on the right, this is like literally the only picture I can find of the Omani Empire. It's the same one I think I used when we talked about this at the beginning of the year. That is in 1856 as well, which is outside of our time period. So not the best, but you get an idea of what we're talking about here. Okay, so there is this Omani Empire there, and then basically the Europeans, like the Portuguese and others, are going to fight conflicts with them over sort of trading posts and trading rights and stuff. So, like the Europeans would come in and put a trading post up, the Omanis would come and say, "No, you can't do that," and they would fight. And depending on who was stronger at the time, they would win or lose or whatever. So. That's kind of what's going on here, and they're trying to prevent the Europeans from dominating Indian Ocean trade. Okay, but there you go. That is Oman. All right. All right, Terrence, when and why did the Safavids fall? Yeah, great question. Pretty sure it's like 1707. They basically get invaded by somebody else. Let's see. Let me double check on that one. Safavid, Safavid Empire. 1736. I was a little off. Yeah, 1736. What happened to them? Yeah, technically it's more like 1722. They had a brief restoration, apparently. Um, what happened to them? Oof, boy, this is not very helpful. They have a section called the Mothers of Safavid. Hey, that's appropriate for Mother's Day, right? Let's see. All right, here we go. Here we go. It looks like, yeah, they just got invaded by some Afghanis, kind of supported by the Russians. So they have this like Afghan army that comes in that basically takes over control of them. You get the impression that they just like had kind of waned over time, like much like the Ottomans, but the Ottomans were kind of propped up after a while. So the Ottomans, remember, like survived for a long time, primarily because the Europeans do not want the Russians to take over, right? Like they're afraid that if the Russians take over control, if the Ottomans get weak, the Russians are going to take control of those territories, and so they don't want to do that. Whereas Iran, being a little bit farther away, I guess, is something that they didn't really care about as much. So yeah, 1722 or 1736, they do have a little brief restoration, but essentially they're invaded by Afghans and other sort of like border tribes and defeated by people who are very similar to them at the other time. Yes, Margaret, it is very much on theme. That is very true. I don't know why it just talks about the mothers of the emperors, but there you go. All right. Let's take a look at time period 3 then, 1750 to 1900. So the Ottomans are going to begin a major decline here. Again, as I mentioned, the part of the reason that they are kind of propped up is for this reason. So for example, there's this war called the Crimean War from Western powers. And basically Russia is trying to take over control of the Ottoman Empire. So if you know anything about Russia, you know they don't really have a warm water port except in like the Black Sea. So most of their ports are like frozen like 6, 7, 8 months of the year. So one of the only ones they have is in the Black Sea. This is part of the reason why the whole Ukraine thing going on right now, like they're trying to establish some more control over those territories. The problem, though, for them is that they can't get out, right? Like of the Black Sea, they have to control the Dardanelles Straits, which is where Istanbul is. So if they have some kind of control or power over those areas, it would help them out a whole lot. When the Crimean War kicks off, the Western powers are like, oh boy, if the Russians win this, they're going to be in a lot of control. They're going to have a lot of power over this area. So they prop them up, basically. That gives it its nickname of the sick man of Europe. Trade is still a major factor for them, but a lot of this trade is really moving around them. So, like through Europe and India, and going by sea instead of land. So they're kind of fading as part of their power, overarchingly. So control of territories fades further and further until it's mostly just Turkey and small parts of the Levant or the kind of Middle East. Middle East. Around this time period, then Egypt, for example, is nominally under their control, but under Muhammad Ali, not the boxer, they are largely independent, and so Egypt will industrialize based on cotton textile production. Eventually, the British will come in and dominate Egypt because of things like the Suez Canal, and the Ottomans will collapse, of course, after World War One. That we'll get there in some more detail a little bit later. There's my boy Muhammad Ali. Originally an Albanian, he was a military leader who was sent to Egypt to take control. He was able to do so, and then essentially kind of sets himself up as like the de facto leader. Like he, again, theoretically was a part of the Ottoman Empire, but he just ran everything on his own. He's got the pointy shoes to show it too. When I was in Egypt, there's all kinds of stuff dedicated to this guy, like everywhere. It's called the Khedival time period, and there's like a huge fortress and a palace and stuff for that was for him. So super important in Egyptian history. All right, continuing on here. All right, continuing on, we saw this image before. I think it was in black and white when we saw it before, but this picture over here is again the idea of the empire and sort of like how it's going to kind of come together under the Young Turks. So one of the big problems that they face in this time period then is how far behind they are. So much like Japan and other places, people start wising up to this issue that they are way behind the Europeans. They don't have the ships, they don't have the guns, the weapons, and so they're kind of afraid of all these things. So what's going to happen then is that there will be um, a number of sultans who are going to lead new reforms. And these reforms are called Tanzimat reforms. They go on for about 50 years or so. I think it's like 1836 until maybe like 1876 or something. And during that time period, you have a number of reform-minded sultans, some more than others, but by and large, most of them are pretty chill with this, and they kind of want this to take place. And so this is known as the term Tanzimat means reorganization in this thing. So it's a period of reform in the Ottoman Empire. Oh, you know what? It's right there in front of me. Sorry, 1839 ends in 1876, and it's an attempt to modernize the empire. Ultimately, it does have some success, right? Like they're able to do things like they finally get rid of the Janissaries, who had been really kind of pushing people around. For example, they're able to issue issue new laws. Again, the whole thing is really just to modernize the whole system. But in 1876, though, they end up having some conservatives that get back on the throne, and that causes some more problems. And they kind of like shove the whole thing to the side. Like they're never able to achieve sort of like European levels of modernization. They get pretty close to it, but they're not able to do like real full-on industrialization and all this other kind of stuff for a variety of reasons. So that is a big problem for them. All right, let's look at 1900 to the present. All right, so big one here, of course, is going to be Unit 7, which is all about these world wars. Now, World War I is fought against the Ottoman Empire, specifically Battle of Gallipoli, as well as numerous battles and other possessions like Iraq. So remember, the Ottoman Empire sides with Germany in this war. Big mistake on that one. And when they do so, they're kind of a sideshow. Like they're not like central to like the Western or Eastern fronts. But there's a theory that like if they can be knocked out of the war, then maybe like the British or somebody could invade from the south up into Austria-Hungary or something, right? So the way that they're going to try to handle this then is they send a whole bunch of Anzac, Australian and New Zealand forces, to this little peninsula called Gallipoli in an attempt to seize the Dardanelles Straits and also the city of Istanbul. But it never goes anywhere. Like it's a famous military disaster because they are stuck on the beaches for months and months and never really go very far. Also down in Iraq, there are a number of things like the siege of Kut and a few other places. These are possessions under the Ottomans, but the British want to take control of them. So there are some fights that go on there as well. Ultimately, though, those are kind of sideshows, not as important. But at the end of the war, then the Ottoman Empire is on the losing side. And so they are carved up into these mandates. This is the League of Nations mandate system for the British and the French. So the British and the French are going to take control of some of these areas, specifically like Syria and Jordan and stuff. The Young Turks then formed the Republic of Turkey in the wake of this war. This, of course, also is the time period of the Armenian genocide from about 1918 to 1920, when numerous Armenians are murdered by the new government. Kemal Ataturk then is going to be the leader of this government and the leader of Turkey in general. His position on this is that they need to be more secular in a sense, right? Like he's pushing for secularity. He does not want to like he wants people to be Islamic if they want to be, but he does not want them to have their lives run by Islam instead. So that is why Turkey becomes kind of the place that it is. Now, the Balfour Declaration in this period is this declaration by the British government about their mandate system, and it provides a legal justification for this Jewish state in Palestine. So it actually occurs before the war, but after the war, when they take control of this area, the Balfour Declaration is something that is called on by the Jewish people who are there. They're like, hey, you remember when you talked about this? Like, we really want to have this state in Palestine, and now you control that state. So let's go ahead and get that stuff done. A couple of other small kind of things here for for World War II. In World War II, the Turks are not really involved, but the Italians are in northern Africa. So the Italians, for example, are in Libya. The Germans come to reinforce them, and they try to take the Suez. They drive towards the Suez Canal, trying to get into the Middle East to take control of some of those oil reserves, but they were unable to do so. There's a battle called the Battle of El Alamein. And the Battle of El Alamein stops the German advance, and then they are forced back across northern Africa, and the United States is able to take over control as well. So they're able to defeat them as well. So that will push them out of there for World War II. Post-war, the two sides of the Cold War tried to work in the Middle East for advantage, but it was often a place of espionage. So like a lot of these countries would sort of like play them off of each other. So like they'd be like, oh, I'll take some tanks, Russia. Maybe I'm on your side. Just kidding. I'll take some money from the US and the United States as well, or whatever. So that's one of those things. The Arab states generally are going to like side with the Soviet Union, not because they're necessarily communists, but they don't like the state of Israel, and the state of Israel is a ally of the United States. So that is why they tend to go that direction. But some of the countries do definitely go the United States' side. Like, for example, Saudi Arabia and others are going to be more closely related to the United States in that period. All right, here we got our post-World War I Middle East. So you got the independent Republic of Turkey, you have an independent Iran, you have an independent Saudi Arabia, and then you have a couple of these mandates, right? So we have the French mandate of Syria, which will become the modern-day country of Syria. I'm fairly certain Lebanon was a part of that, at least at some point. British mandated Palestine, that will become Jordan, as well as the country of Israel. And then we have the British Mandate of Mesopotamia, which eventually becomes Iraq, and that little tiny country they carve out down there called Kuwait as well. So these are the areas that they are in control of. It's important to remember this is kind of similar to our Africa situation, where these are just locations and territories that were under the control of European powers. So they don't make a ton of sense necessarily. Probably the best examples of this is Iraq. Like it was never a historical country. This was not a separate area or whatever, right? And part of the problem that they have is that they are split between Sunnis and Shia. So about 60% of the country today is Shia. Therefore, they have a lot of influence from Iran, and about 40% are going to be Sunnis. So, for example, Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq, was a Sunni Muslim, and so the United States was very happy to fund him in the wake of the Iranian independence. The Iranian we're just about to talk about it. Sorry, the Islamic Revolution of Iran. So the United States was very happy to fund them to try to like counteract against them. So that's kind of part of that problem. Some of these places are like dictatorships. Modern day Jordan is a king, but he has like dictatorial powers. So yeah. All right, let's finish it out here, guys and gals. So time period 1900 to the present. So one thing that's going to happen here is the White Revolution in Iran. This is from 63 to 79. So the Shah of Iran is going to be the king of Iran. He sees that his country is in sort of bad situations. Now, he sounds super nice when I say this, like the White Revolution being awesome and how great he was and how he wanted to do all these things. But the problem with it too is that he was more than happy to have parties and celebrations and stuff, even when like the Islamic groups there didn't like it very much, or even when people needed some money and stuff. Very famously, in the late 70s, he had this party in one of the old Persian capitals, and they brought in like these ice sculptures, which again, it's a desert, so they melted very quickly. But like the amount of like effort and money put into creating the space was pretty enormous. So yeah, so 63 to 79. So this is going to be an aggressive modernization program where he's trying to like help people out. He's going to start like doing like funding money and like trying to get people places to live and getting land distributed and stuff like that. But one of the biggest problems, though, is that he's going to tick off the Islamic conservatives, and those folks will overthrow the government. Middle East gets independence without much fighting. So like all those places we looked at, like Iraq, etc., they were all given their independence in the 50s. OPEC controls oil production through this period. This is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It is an oil cartel that is mostly of Middle Eastern states, but includes like Venezuela because they have a lot of oil as well. And so they, the theory is that if you wanted to, you could just pump all the oil out all of a sudden and make oil really cheap. But of course, that's a problem for them because they want oil to provide money. So they want to kind of slowly ration it to come out, not all at once, but over a period of time. Very controversial, obviously, situation here, which is the Israel-Palestine situation also. Again, we can't really do it justice in this couple of sentences here or whatever, but essentially the United Nations has a plan for an Israeli government. This is in 1947, but it's kind of like, measly and stuff. It's not really much of a country. And so when they declare independence in 48, they will basically take control of larger areas, which leads to a war with the countries around it. That war then ends with Israel's victory, and so they're going to expand their territory, and there will be a couple of more wars over the years. So 3 more wars fought over the next few years, each of which will be won by Israel, and they will expand their territory every time, but they eventually get back some of that territory because they don't necessarily need it, and it is in the situation where we are today. All right, U.S. invasion of Iraq in the 1990s leads to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden attacking the U.S. on 9/11. So remember, what happens here is that Saddam Hussein, who was formerly one of our friends, invades Kuwait. I think this is like 91, 92. And so when he does so, the United States assembles a coalition to push him out of Kuwait. That is headquartered in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi Arabians allow us to put military troops and stuff there. So Osama bin Laden was also one of our allies in Afghanistan fighting against the Soviets. And he gets real mad about the United States being in Saudi Arabia because he considers it to be the land of the prophet, etc. So that's when he turns on us. Again, I'm giving you justifications for this. Like it's all like crazy person terrorist stuff. So like whatever. It's not like a reasoning, but that's the argument that he made at least. And so that of course leads to the attack on the United States on 9/11 in 2001. That causes a lot of devastation and damage. Now, again, this is only tangentially related to the Middle East because, again, bin Laden is actually from Saudi Arabia. And again, he claimed the invasion of Iraq was a part of that. But again, he's in Afghanistan at this point. Like, he's not actually in the United States or anything like that. So that is that. A nice little quick reminder there of all kinds of good information. Awesome. All right, so let's pop in some questions there. We'll start off here with one with Timothy then. Great question. He asked, could you give a brief explanation on the Suez Canal? Yeah, of course. So again, I mean, from a very early time, like even back in the Roman times and stuff, they realized that this is a very narrow space that could potentially be beneficial if it was not there. But the modern day engineering is very difficult to do so. So it will take a number of years, and eventually, I believe it is the French, Le France, is going to take care of this. Let's see. I think it's in. Let's see. What year was it created? It was created in 1859 is when construction began, and it was completed in 1869. So it's a very old canal comparatively. Like, the Panama Canal was built in like the 20s, 1920 or so. So, but it does take quite a long time to actually build. So they're going to dig out this huge space there to allow for ships to go back and forth. The couple of things that are going to happen over time then is that that space is going to become very, very important to the British because they have India, right? So they want to be able to transport goods and things through the canal, and that's going to be a lot quicker than going around Africa. So that's one of the reasons why they always try to protect that territory and make sure that the Suez doesn't go anywhere. So it's one of the justifications that they use for the control of Egypt for a long time. After World War II, then the head of the government, the new head of the government, Nasser, is going to nationalize the Suez Canal. He will take over control of it, and that's going to lead to an invasion by the French and the British to try to get it back. But the United States convinces them to stop doing that, and that just kind of goes away. So the Suez Canal then is still under the control of Egypt, and it, of course, famously got jammed up not too long ago by the ships and stuff. So that's a big problem. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the basics of the situation with the Suez Canal. So initially done by a French company, that company ends up making money off of it for a while, but the government of Egypt is going to take over control of it. If you have a more specific, if that didn't cover what you're looking for, Timothy, let me know and pop it in there. What else we got? Come on. Surely y'all got some other questions about this topic, about this general idea. Anything else going on there that you're curious about? Y'all are very incurious. All right, let's see. What was the main spark for so many conflicts in the Middle East? Yeah, good question. It's going to depend a lot on what time period you're talking about here, but I mean, religion is going to be one of them, obviously. So the Sunni versus Shia conflict is going to be a big one there. So the Sunnis represented by the Ottomans, and of course the Shia represented by the Safavids. That will also be the case in the 1980s when we have Saddam Hussein versus the Islamic government of Iran as well. You can also see that when it comes to things like the Palestinian-Israeli conflict as well. But some of this also just has to do with land, right? Land and territory. So there's also like some of the other conflicts and things that are going on there are just like, even all the way back to the Mongols. They're just invading this territory because it is fruitful, it is good land, it's strategically important in the locations that it's in. So that's some of the biggest reasons why they're going to do that. I mean, I would say, religion as well as just occupying of the land, a good resource-filled land is a part of that. Today, of course, like the oil reserves there are huge as far as the resources go. But in the olden days, it was places like Iraq had a lot of water and they could grow a lot of food there, which compared to the rest of the Middle East was very difficult. So that was a big factor. There's also like some trade kind of stuff going on. So control of Constantinople or Istanbul would give whoever controlled it a lot of money because they could fund that money and put that money through. So that would be some of the biggest factors, I think, as far as some of the main sparks that were there for those conflicts in that time period, in this whole time period. Good question. Anybody else? Good question. So Allison asks, are the similarities and differences between the Ottomans and the Safavids usually important on the exam? Yeah, I mean, I would say so. It's kind of a classic question, like, something that they teach us to teach you. And so as a result of that, I would say, yeah, it probably is something that you would see. Whether or not it's going to pop up so explicitly in the question, I'm not sure that you would see that necessarily, but I could very easily see a question about, compare and contrast a gunpowder empires or something like that, right? Or some gunpowder empires. And so doing that would be a good way for them to ask it. I could also see potentially a multiple choice question where they have a stimulus that is related to this topic, to like Ottomans or Safavids, and then they would ask some questions that are related to this as well. So yeah, sure, I think that could happen. And again, just since we're here, like similarities and differences, right? Like similarities, they're both Muslim gunpowder empires, right? They're in the same general part of the world, which is the Middle East or whatever. They have slave soldiers, which are very similar to each other. They also have they're also Turkic groups. They're from the Turkish parts of the world, and they have similar foundings. Like Osman is the guy who founds the Ottoman Empire, and Ismail founds the Safavid Empire. So those are examples of some similarities. Obviously, the biggest difference is the religious situation. Sunnis versus Shia would be part of it. You could also talk a bit about its longevity, would be something that's different. The Safavids don't really last very long necessarily. You could also talk about the Safavids are very much what's the word for it? Like they're very much a part of. They don't really have like navies and stuff, right? Like they're very much a part of uh, their land-based kind of area, right? Whereas the Ottomans have land, other areas, things like that. Like they're big empire with lots of like water space that they have to control. Also, while there are definitely some ethnic minorities within the Safavid Empire, mostly it's going to be people of Persian descent. Some Kurds and some other stuff like that here and there. But the predominant grouping is going to be of ethnicities is going to be Persians, whereas the Ottoman Empire is very diverse comparatively. So they're going to have Turks as well as Arabs. They're going to have like Jewish people. They're going to have Greeks. They're going to have anybody who lives in the Balkans basically as well. So that would be some similarities and differences that I would think of that could pop up. Again, always use your spice factors whenever you're thinking about similarities and differences. If some kind of question comes up like that about similarities and differences, let's say they had Ottomans and Safavids, I want you to just go down through spice, right? Like what's socially different about them? What's politically different about them? What is environmentally different? What's culturally different? What's economically different, right? Those are the kind of things that you want to do to try to come up with in your brain what kind of things might be useful to you for that question. Okay, good question. All right, anything else? I'd love to get one more before we go. If you got anything else about this time period, anything else? While you're pondering that, don't forget that our next one of these will be on Tuesday night, and it's just an open free for all kind of thing. So y'all, I tend to get the same people, which I love seeing y'all. But come with questions, okay? Like come with things for us to talk about. If you can come early, that would be very helpful. Like if most people were here from 7 to 8 or something, or 7 to 7:30, that would be super helpful as we trail off at the end or something. But you're feel free to come in at any time. I will be answering questions. I'm not going to record it probably just because it may just end up being super random. Not to mention there may be like 20 or 30 minutes where it's just me staring at a camera. But yeah, I mean, if you see something, if you come for that, that would be a great opportunity to ask questions or anything. So, all right. Well, I can't coax another question out of you, and that's fine. So we'll go ahead and call it here. Don't forget, be studying. Okay, like getting things ready. We are in the final countdown here as we come up to Thursday, getting ready for this test. Y'all are gonna be fantastic. I appreciate y'all being here tonight, and y'all do some good studying, and I'll see y'all tomorrow. Okay, y'all take care. Bye, guys. Absolutely.